When it comes to climate, there's so much to be done and so much each of us can do. But zoom out. There are three things, three universal themes that matter: money, power, and storytelling. I'm Cody Sims, partner at My Climate Journey and co-founder of Climate Changemakers. And I'm going to break down each of these things and tie it to how each of them make the world a better place and can also drive prosperity. Let's start with money. The global GDP is in the mid $80 trillion range, which is a number certainly I can't comprehend. The US GDP is about a little more than $20 trillion. China is about $16 trillion, a little bit more. Conventional wisdom says that growth equals development, which equals production. And environmental concerns are in the form of regulation, which slow this down. But let's consider now the obvious case of something like Tesla. This past month, Tesla cracked $1 trillion in market cap as a single company. It's one of the 6 most valuable companies in the world. This is a company that 10 years ago almost basically wasn't even on the radar. ExxonMobil, on the other hand, their market cap is now about $270 billion. Just this month, Elon Musk of Tesla's individual net worth surpassed the entire market cap of Exxon. And in 2014, Exxon itself was the most valuable company in the world. What can we as individuals do here? Well, of course, we can look to where our own personal finances are invested. And this matters. We can ensure that our retirement accounts, our investment accounts are in funds that are backing companies that represent the future that we want. And we can ensure that our banks and credit cards are issued by lenders that are not significant enablers of fossil fuel build-outs and the continued carbonization of the world. But we want to take it a step further. One wave of impact investing that is not about divesting fossil fuels, rather is about engaging in an activist way to push agendas at the major board level to help drive new agendas in the boardroom. Recently, an investment fund called Exxon Number One helped lead a major board level change at Exxon and pushed for more climate-friendly governance there. You can go even a step further on action. As an entrepreneur, you can decide to pledge the profits of your company to supporting the world you want to see. One entrepreneur I know is pledging 50% of the profits of his business to supporting climate causes. He actually recently gave a very generous financial gift to my political action nonprofit, Climate Changemakers, which we're going to cover about more in a minute. There are a handful of pro-climate ETFs and investment funds we at Climate Changemakers are in discussion with that are looking to donate a portion of their management fees for climate-oriented organizations. This is the future. This is how you can align capital with action, and this is how future profits will be created in a way that helps reinforce the systems we all want to see enabled, which, of course, if you're building an enterprise in the climate space, ultimately helps push your company forward. So it creates a wonderful circularity to your efforts. So that's money. That's thing one. That's financial leverage. And you can already see how this bleeds into the second big lever here, which is power. Of course it does. Money and power, they're like peanut butter and jelly. But let's spend a little bit of time on power and talk about how it manifests from a climate perspective and how entrepreneurship can be a lever on climate power. Power resides in places where you get to set the rules. In most systems, this is in the political process, and it involves lawmakers. How do lawmakers get into places of power? In most modern governments, they're elected in a democratic fashion through the will of the people. And yet they're meant to represent the voice of the people. But that clearly doesn't always happen. Let's take the United States, the world's largest cumulative emitter of greenhouse gases. The recent climate opinion maps from the Yale program on climate change communications show that 72% of Americans believe global warming is happening. And 71% believe it will harm future generations. And even 57%, a clear majority, believe that global warming is caused by human activities. But if you looked at the political situation in the United States, you wouldn't believe that. The U.S. has been struggling throughout most of 2021 to pass landmark climate legislations, and proposals have been locked in a near 50-50 polarized split that's pretty much straight down party lines. Now, I'm not going to get political here today, but I will get climate action oriented. And so to get clear climate policies passed, it's important to do two very specific things. One is to remove climate obstructionists from office and to replace them with climate-friendly votes. And two is to convert passive climate voting legislators, meaning those who, will generally support a bill, to active climate champions, meaning those who will sponsor and write pro-climate legislation. So how does this happen? This happens by individuals demanding change and by companies demanding change. How can you do this? You can do this by using your own voice as part of a regular weekly habit. You can call, email, tweet at your representatives. You can write letters to the editor about why issues matter. You can craft your own personal talking points about why these issues matter to you, and so that you can have conversations with friends and family members. You can do all of this in your own words, and that's really important. The more we speak with conviction about these issues and help it tie to how these issues relate to each of us, the more we can all be heard. At Climate Changemakers, which I mentioned earlier, we gather people together to do these actions as part of a regular weekly hour of action. We work to make these things a habit and help us all build this muscle together. And on the company level, if your company works in the climate space, getting climate-friendly lawmakers into office or turning passive climate lawmakers into pro-climate action majority, this is going to help your company too, because they're going to pass policies that help ultimately benefit the things you're working toward. So beyond individual action, there's definitely stuff your company can do. Many companies spend significant money lobbying the government for policies with executives in government relation roles and by hiring lobbying firms. If you work in a big company, your company's probably doing these things, and you can get involved in what your company is doing here. Find out if your company is lobbying for or against important climate legislation. One organization that is spending real time here is Climate Voice. They're spending energy understanding how big tech is focused from a climate lobbying perspective. They're publicizing their findings, and they're working to activate employees inside these companies to create green teams and actually push on each company's leadership to do more. And it's really working. Of course, if you work at a startup or if you run your own company, then you can get involved in lobbying and advocacy directly. There's little in the way of political advocacy or lobbying groups for startups, and this is a challenge. Obviously, it's a lot easier for a government official to pick up the phone and call a government relations person at a large company they know. So what I've been seeing is groups of startups working to take things into their own hands. Startups who work in a similar space like carbon capture or soil sequestration. They've been creating working groups to understand legislative issues and develop their own wish lists, and then going to lawmakers together and making one collective ask on the changes they wish to see. This is so important. Often these are even startups who may be even pseudo-competitive with each other, but they know that if they can force a systemic policy change, they can all win, because the opportunity to decarbonize the global economy is so incredibly big that there's room enough for all of them to build considerable growth. And leveling the legislative playing field of incentive structures and tax credits away from carbon-heavy incumbents will benefit all of them. So this is collective action, whether individual or at the company level, and it's action that matters and will push the structures of power to enable new entrants to build meaningful businesses that benefit us all. So that's power. Let's talk about the third leg of the stool, and it's the one that's most overlooked. We've talked about money. We've talked about power. Let's talk about storytelling. It sounds soft, but it is not soft at all. Storytelling is about aligning hearts and minds. It's about building a sense of aspiration, of desire, of the future. Today, most climate storytelling is soul-crushing. It's about heat waves and droughts and floods and disasters and about what happens if we don't hit net zero targets that all feel out of our control. And, that may motivate some people to act, but the history of social movements, if you really look back in time, they show us that if you want to get mass mobilization, you need to do so with hope. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Harvey Milk. These are people who led enormous cultural movements and did so by inspiring millions and millions of people with hope about what could be. But today in the climate space, the stories are still mostly about what we lose. They're stories of anger. They're stories about what's going to go away. We shouldn't eat meat. We shouldn't drive SUVs. We shouldn't travel in airplanes. We shouldn't use air conditioning. The coral reefs are going to be gone. Wildfires will burn. Polar ice caps will melt. These are definitely not images of hope. And with reason. We need to jar people into a sense of urgency. But, again, going back to that Yale climate study mentioned earlier, people are jarred. Over 2/3 of Americans believe that global warming is real. People are experiencing it. They get it. So where are the stories of what the world will look like once we successfully decarbonize? Where are they? What do things look like once we have a clean energy grid? Once we can produce food in regenerative manners at scale? Once AI continues to advance to the point of synthetically produced materials in a lab becoming as easy to create as writing software? Once we can nourish our bodies with proteins that aren't shipped halfway across the world for our consumption. Once we wear clothing that doesn't require microplastics that are based on fossil fuel petrochemicals that leach into our water supply. Once we're able to all afford EVs and we have all electric homes. What does that world look like? When energy, it's basically free because it's all produced renewably, and energy storage curves have come down so that batteries are no longer an issue, and lithium can be harvested 10,000 times more sustainably using new methods or even created in a lab. And what about when nuclear fusion comes to fruition and we have an always-on energy source that can power entire cities? These things are all potentially happening in our lifetimes. We hear about all the horrible things that may be happening in our lifetimes, but these are also potentially going to happen. And will they happen fast enough to present some of the worst effects of climate change on humanity and on the biosphere? We don't know. But they could. And that hope seems like a story worth telling. How can we all help with storytelling? We can imagine the future. We can each create our own personal narratives. We can question everything we do today and try to imagine a world where things are just better. Start living your life with that story in mind. Help inspires others around you to give a darn in this way too. And if you run a company, embrace this. Tell the story of the future that matters. Use your platform to inspire others and to get more people talking in this way so we can all be inspired to care and to act. Money, power, storytelling. Now you have the keys. What ignitions will you start with them?